Good afternoon. My name's Nicole Wong. I'm from your legal department. A lot of my responsibility is for the launch of our products. I think if you guys are engineers or PMs, you're probably working with the product council, some of whom work with me. That was my first job when I got here, which is to launch our products. And I get a lot of questions about privacy. And one of the things that I have always been really proud to tell people outside of Google about the work we do here is that at Google, privacy is not just a lawyer's problem, which is how it is in a lot of other companies. It's really exciting to be in a place where privacy is actually something that from our engineers through our executives really care about. And it's because we know that our users are at the sort of center of everything that we do. So this is an important talk. It's actually a talk that a bunch of you have been asking to have for a while, so I'm sorry it took us a while to get it together. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Peter.
Great, thank you. Is my mic on yet? Yeah, can you hear it? All right. Well, here we are a week before Christmas, so it seems the right time to take a review of the privacy challenges that we faced in the last year, to take stock of some of the things that we've done as a company to improve our own privacy practices, to talk a little bit about the privacy controversies that you've read about in the press and you've heard about from your friends. So here it is. You know, people say, well, wouldn't it be nice if the privacy controversies for Google just blew over? That's not going to happen. That's not the kind of company we are. Think about our mission. Our mission is to help organize the world's information and make it useful for people. The world's information, right? A big part of the world's information is going to be the kind of information that some people would rather you not know about. Their personal data, their personally identifiable information. And so we have to find a way to draw the lines in our own services and our own practices between data that we need to protect in privacy terms and information that we help to make useful, accessible, et cetera, to people in other terms. So let me do a little overview of the steps that we've taken in 2008. I'm sorry, an overview of the steps we've taken in 2007. The goals and objectives for 2008 have not been accomplished yet. So here are some of the big things that we've done. Probably the single biggest step that was been taken by Google in the last year to improve our privacy practices was our logs anonymization step. And let me explain exactly what that meant for those of you who aren't familiar with it. Anytime someone conducts a search on Google, we capture a server log. And if you want to know what's in the log, here it is. That's the string. By the way, up on our website for quite a long time, we've had explanations of what exactly is in a server log. We've tried to explain every single element of the server log to people who aren't as technologically focused as we are here at Google. So we explain what's an IP address, the time and date stamp, the domain, the query term, the technical information, and the cookie ID number. So a lot of times people ask the question, well, if I conduct a search on Google, what do you capture? Or they ask it a different way and say, what do you know about me? What's in your databases? Well, for unauthenticated search, this is what we have in our databases. And you know, until we made our announcement about logs anonymization, neither we nor anybody in the industry had a finite retention policy for that server log string. A lot of people were saying, gee, you could do better in privacy terms. And I think they were right. We had a lot of internal discussions about that, and we concluded that we should, in fact, have a finite retention policy. So let me say what it looks like first after anonymization, and then the reasons for the policy that we announced. So first of all, we took a look at this string, and we said, what are the elements in the string that could conceivably be tied to an identifiable human being? Not in all cases, but in some cases. And they are the IP address and the cookie ID number. So those are the two elements in the server log string that we're going to anonymize. Not perfectly, but break the likelihood of identifiability of a person behind them. Now, after 18 months, all the server logs in unauthenticated search will look like that. When will that start? Well, it'll actually start next month in January for web search. And after that, in the course of the following months for a lot of other services. People say, why did you pick 18 months? Now, before we announced our policy, we and everybody else in the industry maintained these logs indefinitely, or at least for periods that were not disclosed to end users. We picked 18 months because we considered a number of factors. We looked at how exactly is the data collected, how is it used, what are the purposes for which we need it inside Google. Privacy would naturally indicate that the shorter the time period, the better. But we had to take other factors into consideration as well. And those factors are down here. I mean, very importantly, we're always trying to improve our search quality. And having logs is useful for that. We need to protect our systems from hackers. And having logs is useful for that. You know, sometimes you find suspicious patterns of interaction with your site that might be indicative of malicious intent. And you recognize the pattern retrospectively, but not necessarily at the moment at which people access. The same is true for fighting click fraud, ad spam, all kinds of other bad things. And these are factors that we think were important. You know, you can't just solve a privacy problem and say, hey, we won't keep these logs for 1 second, if by doing that you undermine the security of the systems, or if you undermine the ability to fight fraud or malicious hackers and other things. Now, after we announced this, a couple months later, Microsoft and Yahoo also followed our lead and announced their own policies. And we were delighted that we went first and that we set in motion a process to reconsider this set of issues. Microsoft announced 18 months, just like us. Yahoo announced 13 months. And I think both of them stressed that it was important to have data that was long enough to recognize the cyclicality of patterns on the internet, knowing that people interact with sites differently from month to month in the course of the year. And just a couple weeks ago, you noticed that Ask launched a product called Ask Eraser that would apparently allow people to get rid of logs, or logs are eliminated after a matter of hours. But it's also important to note that, of course, Ask is not serving its own ads. We serve ads on the Ask site. And since a lot of the factors that guided why we needed to retain the logs apply to the ad serving business, if you don't do that, you don't have the same reasons. So people sometimes said, well, why don't you do just what Ask did? And that's the main reason. Another thing that we did in the course of the last year was reduce the lifetime of the Google Pref cookie. Now, before this, our Pref cookie was set to expire in the year 2038. Yeah, 2038, which is over 30 years ahead, and that's longer than the lifespan of most PCs. A lot of people said that's just disproportionate. You know, why do you need to set cookies to expire so far in the future? And you know, the answer from our point of view is, look, we just wanted to set it into the future so that we wouldn't lose settings. Like, why should we artificially lose someone's language preferences? Say, I want an interface in English and I want search results in German and English, for example, right? And why should that just disappear at a random point in time? Nonetheless, a lot of people in the outside world said, yeah, but Google, you're such a leading company. By setting cookie expiration periods so far into the future, you're setting a bad example. And we took a fresh look at this, and we said, well, we'll try to find a solution that works to have an expiration period after 2 years for people who are not active users. But to avoid the problem of having people's settings artificially disappear at a artificial point in time, we'll have an auto-renew function. So for active users, the expiration periods will be pushed back. I think that's probably the right solution. At least it seemed like the reasonable solution. Some people thought this was an important step forward in privacy. Other people didn't. That's fine. Nobody thinks it's bad. Very broadly, one of the areas that we're working on very hard is improving transparency. You know, if you think about the principles that guide good privacy practices at Google, or frankly anywhere else, I really think there are two of them. One is being transparent. In other words, explaining to users what you do in ways that people can understand. It doesn't help to provide users with privacy policies that were written in the incomprehensible language of legalese. It also doesn't help to provide privacy policies in geek speak if our average users aren't going to understand that. So we work really hard at trying to find ways to provide this kind of notice in ways that will be clear, simple, and easy to understand. Let me give you just two examples. One is the kind of just-in-time notice. So it's not the notice, the privacy policy at the bottom of the page that a person might click on once, but not necessarily at the moment in time at which data is being collected. This just-in-time kind of notice will pop up when a user is doing something and they need to make a choice. Here, in the case of Toolbar, it says, look, do you want to enable PageRank or not? And we force a user to make a choice, right? And we give very basic information in red. We know you just want the toolbar, but please read it first. And then we give links to more information for the small subset of people who really want to go deep on the topic. And we give the high-level basic information in one screen for the people who just want that. I think that's a good model for giving notice to users for things like this.
Sorry, a new change where it says not equal yada yada?
That's right. We can't speak yada yada forever, can we? You know, we've got to. And then, so let me just say, we're taping this, so we're not going to generally do Q&A now, and we'll do it in a few minutes. The other initiative that we launched, and I think this is quite promising, and you'll see a lot more of this in 2008, is the idea of helping to explain our privacy practices to users in a different format than words. You know, there are a lot of people out there who simply don't like to read privacy policies. We know that. I mean, the whole industry knows that. So we all say it's important to provide notice to people, and the whole industry uses a model that we know people don't like. So we're experimenting with a different format, and that different format is video. People like to watch videos more than they like to read privacy policies. So if you can explain privacy policies in a video format, you actually reach people better. So we've launched a few. Here are the first two. One is to describe the information that we collect at Google when somebody does a search in the unauthenticated form. And the second video, the same thing when you're logged in. We've launched a third, or about to launch a third, on cookies. And in fact, just today, we put out a series of 10 short videos that give people tips. You know, what are the privacy settings and how can they use them in different Google products? And I'll show you those in a minute. One of the things that I also want to touch on is some examples from individual products or services about how we put the principles of transparency and user control into practice. Some of these have been the subject of controversy that you may have heard about or read about. So I'll give you our perspective on some of them. First, here are 3 flavors of search. I just want to remind people that, of course, you can not signed in with search history, or signed in with the full shebang. And let me just go to one of the things that people have talked about quite a bit in privacy circles, and that is web history. So web history, of course, is a sign-in service. You have to have a Google account for it to work. And if you do, it can remember the searches that you conducted and some of your web browsing history. But in privacy terms, I think there are a couple things that are quite important to point out. I mean, one is that there's a pause button. You can pause. It'll stop tracking this when you hit pause and won't resume until you hit it again. And of course, you can flag any particular item and remove it from your history if you want to. Nicole always gives the example of searching for a birthday present for your husband, and you might want to pause or delete those before resuming. I can think of other examples that are more relevant in my world. But anyway, there it is. And so I think in privacy terms, you know, what do you care about? You care about transparency and user choice. And so you can't be more transparent than the thing that lets a person see everything that's in their history. And putting the choice into people's hands to say, I want that to stay in or I want that out, is an awfully good implementation of those principles in a particular service. I've already showed you how you use it. In a few other services, I think one of the important things to point out are the technologies that we're developing and the privacy settings that we have in our products that allow users to say, hey, this is something that I want to share with the world. Like, let's say you write a blog and you want to publish it so anybody can read it. You can do that. You can just as well say, no, this is something that I just want to share with a small number of people, just my friends, just my family, or so on. So as a company, and I think more broadly as an industry, we've done a pretty good job in terms of building the privacy settings into our products. I think there is a challenge ahead in making sure that users are aware of these settings and that they stop to think about them and they use them as appropriate, in particular for kids or teenagers. We have all heard the stories about people, you know, who put up photos about themselves that they thought were really funny, you know, drunk at a friend's birthday party. But 5 years later, they don't think it's so funny when they're interviewing for a job, and it's all still out there. So getting people to be aware of what it means to post content to the internet, I think, is a really important task. It's something we have a role to play in, of course, but so do schools, so do government officials. It's a much broader problem, and we're just one player in it. But the first and essential step was to have developed the settings that allow people to control who can actually see their information. And you'll see similar things in just about any of our social networking type products. I want to touch on a few of the controversies that have erupted in the course of 2007. Some of them, I think, just based on a misunderstanding of what's going on. Others based on a more principled or even philosophical disagreement, especially where there are conflicting principles at play. And I'll give you a couple different examples. So one on Google Earth. Well, on Google Earth, you can't based on current resolution, identify individual human beings yet. And you certainly can't. And so what do we do at Google? Well, we get images from third-party satellite providers, and we put it up there. Some of them have zones that have been grayed out or obliterated in one form or another. We don't do that ourselves. That's the way the imagery comes to us. I don't know if anybody can identify that from the picture. Short challenge. It's The Hague, the capital of the Netherlands. And that's right downtown. You can, of course, just walk on any of these streets. So I'm not sure what that accomplishes. But that's the way the image came to us from the satellite provider. That's the security set of issues that we see in Earth. But we're starting to see an emerging set of privacy issues in Earth. So it's not identifiable human beings. But it may be, hey, that's my red car. And that was parked in front of somebody else's house. And hey, what were you doing there? We've heard that kind of story. We've heard the story about people, that's my ranch, that's my farm, that's my house. I just don't want it there. And there is a debate in some countries about whether or not property should be considered to be personally identifiable information, personal data, such that the person should have control over it, the ability to say, please take it down. Of course, we strongly disagree with that view. We think that privacy rights should attach to an individual identifiable human being and not to property. But that's a debate that will continue, especially as the resolution improves and as people become more and more familiar with these services. And on the related product of Street View, this is one of those products that, I don't know, it really captured the imagination of a lot of privacy advocates and journalists, far out of proportion to its significance, in my opinion. But Street View, as you know, are images that were taken at street level. And they're taken in public places. We literally drive up and down streets and take images that you can see, and then they're tied to addresses and so on. Like this example, most of the imagery does not include faces that you would view as identifiable. But it's true that there are some. Right? In this one, you couldn't tell who those people are from faces. You can't read the license plate. In some others, that you can. And the question is, well, is that right in privacy terms? And so here's a case where we have two conflicting principles at play. On the one hand, the US has a tradition of public spaces. And in a public space, people do not have the same expectation of privacy as they do in their own home. And a public space means just that. And one of the things you can do in a public space is take photographs and put it up on the internet. Now, that's not a lack of privacy protection in the US. That's a long and, I think, noble tradition. It's over a 100-year tradition that says that a public space is good for society. It's a place we can interact with each other and share information. And one of the things that's quite interesting is that the balance between the concept of a public space on the one hand and privacy on the other was struck quite differently in other countries around the world. Take the example of Europe, where I'm based, or Canada, or Australia. There are sets of laws that say even in a public space, people have a right to privacy. So there's an expectation of privacy, such as we would think in the US people have in their homes, for example, that might apply if they're walking down a public street. And we know that we'll have to launch a version of Street View in those countries that will try not to have identifiable faces and try not to have identifiable license plates. Over time, we'll have to ask ourselves the question about whether we can have one consistent standard worldwide. But for now, we've just launched Street View to capture US imagery. And we're thinking about this internationally for Canadian, European, and Australian launches as well. And that's the debate. It really is a debate of two conflicting principles. Just a word on Gmail. I think all of you know that Gmail works on a contextual ad system. So it's a software program that scans the content of an email that's open on a person's screen. And just like there are software programs that look for viruses or try to filter out spam, it'll look for words that can serve as a way to target and add to a contextual word that appears in the email. It's done dynamically. There's no record of it. Nonetheless, there's at least one person in the world running around saying, Google reads your emails. I won't mention who he is, but he's in Redmond. And of course, it's a software program, right? All webmail programs have to scan emails, and for the purposes that I said, right? Looking for spam, viruses, resolution, even functionalities like spell check and so on. Ours does one additional thing, which is it looks for words that can show ads against the contextual model. The competing models serve ads based on a demographic profile. In other words, when you sign up for some of the competing services, you're asked a lot of detailed questions. Give me your age, where do you live, are you rich, poor, male, female, do you have children or not? And it's very clear that that's done to constitute a demographic profile so that ads can be targeted against that profile. Well, that's not our model. Our model is based on a keyword that pops up on the screen when you have it open. I personally believe that this is a better model in privacy terms than having a demographic profile. Other people think exactly the opposite, and I respect both of those opinions, but this is the way we do it. It's the contextual model. And now just a word on privacy-enhancing technologies. There's a lot of thought and effort into trying to recreate through technology some of the privacy protections that had been lost due to technologies. So if you think about, I think about this somewhat philosophically, you think about the world of the phone conversation. There was no permanent record. It was by and large illegal to wiretap, except going through very elaborate legal systems. And therefore, there was a sense that there was an evanescence of your conversation when you talked to somebody on the phone. And as conversations migrated into this world of email and chat, suddenly there can be these permanent written records of the content of a communication. And that raises privacy problems. So one of the things that our team has done that I think is quite interesting is to have architected a go off the record functionality here, so that if you click it, the person you're chatting with won't be able to have a written record of the chat. It's a way that technology has recreated some of the confidentiality that, in fact, technology had taken away. Now for something slightly more timely, if you will, and that's the debate around privacy considerations in third-party ad networks. You all know that the banner ads that you see on websites today look something like this. And one of the questions is, well, in privacy terms, back to those fundamental principles that we talk about all the time, transparency to end users and choice, what's the consent model, what's the transparency model for something like this? The average consumer who sees this on their screen that is placed there by a third-party ad-serving company might not know, well, who actually placed that here? And what if I want to know more about it? Where do I go? What are my choices? So as we think about this world, we're toying with a number of different ways to improve the quality of notice to consumers and to improve the quality of choice. One way might be this, right? To put a URL of the advertiser, so somebody would have a way to sort of get more information. Another might be a feedback button. One of the experiments is to say, if a user clicks on that, they can go to a site and give us feedback, tell us what they think. Did they like the ad? Do they want to see more ads like that? Or do they never want to see an ad like that again, right? I mean, I have seen, I don't know how many ads for cars in my life. I don't own a car. I've never owned a car, and I probably will never own a car. But I will have seen 100,000 ads for cars, right? That makes no sense in the real world. So if I could give some feedback and say, stop showing me ads for things that are causing the polar ice caps to melt, I would be happy, right? So, so maybe this is a way we can do it. I say we're experimenting because it really is an emerging area. But the existing models that have governed the quality of notice and consent to consumers have been in place and largely static since 2002, when the Network Advertising Initiative launched the policies that govern this space. And I'm hoping that if we get approval to complete the acquisition of DoubleClick, that we'll be able to innovate and improve practices, not just in the Google universe, but perhaps across the industry. This is some examples of what the ads might look like, but I'm just running out of time. The final area that we're engaging with quite a bit is the public policy debate. Let's be clear, the concepts of privacy are changing a lot. The historical concepts of privacy largely depended on forgetfulness, incompetence, laziness. In other words, information was just lost, or nobody would bother to go through the trouble to try to find it. And that's what protected people's privacy in the real world for millennia. And here we are in this technological age where You don't actually ever need to forget anything. Everything can be remembered for everything, ever. And of course, we work at a company that makes it easy to find everything. Well, if you can remember everything and find everything, that has profound implications for the concept of privacy in our societies. That's not unique to Google. That's a challenge much more broadly. So what are some of the public policy answers that we need to bring to bear in this new world? Well, one of them is to say, what's going on in terms of data transfers in the world? But let's face the realities first. And after facing the realities, let's talk about public policy prescriptions. And one of the realities is that information is flowing around the world. Use a credit card, your data could flow through 6 or 7 countries. There's an interesting study that showed that. You might not be aware of that. It can flow not just to your bank, the credit card processor, the merchant, customer service, and they can all be located in many different countries. And yet a lot of the traditional notices of privacy protections were based on the concept that, hey, as long as the data doesn't flow out of my country, I can protect it. And that concept that data doesn't flow out of my country is simply not true anymore. So privacy law regimes that are based on that concept haven't caught up with the technological realities. One of the things that I like to do historically is look at the age and the context in which various public policy prescriptions were first elaborated. The OECD principles down here from the early 80s already were focusing on the issue of transborder data flows. But think about it, that was long before the internet. And so transborder data flows today are many millions of times greater than they were then. The European model, which is a highly elaborate and some would say legal or even legalistic response to the question of data protection, was elaborated in 1995, so just at the cusp of the internet. So it too largely works on a data export control model. And APEC is the most recent of the international frameworks, Asia-Pacific, that has been developed in the internet age, and so thinks less about trying to do export control of data and think more about putting the obligations on data collectors regardless of the transfer or location of the data, and to develop concepts of accountability and responsibility for those data collectors. Of course, the idea is to help to create minimum standards around the world to protect data as it flows around the globe, and that is the reality of what's going on today. We're to say minimum standards because there are a lot of countries around the world that have no regimes in place whatsoever. In fact, it's over the majority of countries. It's certainly not to lower standards in places, like let's take Europe as an example, where there are elaborate regimes already in place, even if those regimes perhaps need to be updated in certain ways. And when I think about this as a challenge, people say, well, isn't that unrealistic? Isn't it just too ambitious? How are you going to get global consensus over that set of issues? Well, I like to think of a couple analogies. Think of the analogy of copyright, for example. There is an international convention on that. You can't protect copyright just in the borders of one particular country. It's in every country's interest to have a regime to protect intellectual property rights. Isn't that also true of privacy? We don't need to get to 100%, but with over half the countries in the world with no regime in place, there's a lot of incremental progress that we can make. And having a consistent set of principles to work off of is important for having standards that will work in the age of the internet. One of the realities is also that services like ours and other services on the internet cannot be architected to start and stop differently at national borders. So to the extent that we can drive consistent understandings of core privacy principles, I think that will fit the realities of global data transfers and internet services today. Those principles haven't really changed all that much. The principles that the OECD articulated in the early 80s, by and large, have stood the test of time. So I don't think it's an unrealistic goal. So there'll be a lot of room for creativity ahead. Despite all the confusion, despite all the debates, despite all the controversies, I think everything boils down to something really simple. It's not Google is MC squared, but it is transparency and user choice. How about that? So thanks.